Okay, welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project on the morning of Friday, the 20th of February in Australia, at least. We're going to remind ourselves very briefly about the code of conduct and IPR rules of CEFACT projects. We're working under the open development process, and all of the ideas and the collateral we produce is meant to be under a royalty-free license. There are also sort of codes of conduct rules, which you can click on the links in the slide if you need to be informed about them. The agenda that we used yesterday, so 17 hours after the meeting we had in my time yesterday, was this one that you're seeing on the screen now. I'll very quickly, for the benefit of the recording or others, kind of walk through what we discussed and what was agreed, because we did a bit of work during the meeting and we've done a little bit of work since on some of the issues and so on. The first thing we talked about, I'll do this quickly. First thing we talked about was where the meetings are, if you want to find out what previous meetings discussed. So this meeting that we're having right now will become a document inside this folder. That means it's publicly available and people can read it and so on. It's published on the website material as well. And the transcript from yesterday's meeting is the one that I'm forming here. I'm just going through an editing process to make sure that there aren't typos and hallucinations and whatever else inside that meeting minutes. The other thing we talked about at some length was the schedule for the project itself. And this is the image that we showed yesterday. So I haven't done any changes to the image, but I'll try and summarize the discussion. We'll talk about some fundamental things, Mark, around what the project is going to be producing as sort of output, and whether we should consider producing a recommendation, as it's called in CEFACT, which has a particular kind of loaded meaning about what you have to do to have a recommendation. It results in the CEFACT body through UNECE recommending to all of the United Nations member states that a thing is done. So it's sort of quite weighty in its outcome. But we can produce specifications and standards and other things without any of that burden. So what we're going to be doing is this diagram you're looking at here. It's going to be relaxed a bit because it turns out that there isn't a May forum. There was, and now there isn't because of budget cuts and whatever. So we don't need to have this sort of May deadline, which you can see on the far right of this diagram if you're looking at it. That doesn't need to be there. We can relax a little bit. But what will happen is that our documents will be reviewed at any time in any month by the CEFACT Bureau, and we can kind of produce a spec and the documentation set and then declare it to be ready. So the process we will follow is in the next few days, we'll kind of baseline the documents we currently have. We'll then continue to improve and work on them, probably for at least a couple of weeks. I've got it here until sort of towards the end of March, maybe actually going into sort of April timeframe now. And then we'll kind of declare, hopefully, that it's finished, good enough to be available for review. And then that will be the version that's then made available for review. We can still continue to work on them in the meantime, but we'll declare version 0.7 or whatever the number is available for review, and then it'll all be kind of done. At that point, we can then decide, do we want to work on a recommendation? That's going to be with the advisors of CEFACT Bureau. We'll do a sort of another sort of consideration about whether we want to do a recommendation. And what I'm going to do on this page, which is the About the Project page, is produce two visualizations of the schedule. The first one is this one with an update to show producing documents. The second one is going to be, if we do a recommendation, this is what it looks like. And that's going to be TBD, to be decided. So that's kind of what we talked about for quite some time yesterday afternoon, about what we're doing and the deadlines and dates and so on. We then went to look at some of the open issues and a kind of merge requests that are floating around. So I actually did merge the things that we talked at. Two of the merge requests we talked at yesterday were around improving the document layout structure and what's called I'm calling the target operating model. How would the grid operate? So that particular merge request is this one here, merge request number 18, as it is, in fact. That's already been run. So if you were to look at this document structure on the left-hand side here, you'll see the glossary, for example, is now the second highest document in the list. And that reflects a realization on our part that it's really important that people understand what we're talking about. And what we want to do is define the terms that we're using in a clear and succinct way so that the remaining documents can lean on the glossary. And if it was, as it was before, Appendix or Annex D, it risks being forgotten about. So we're kind of bringing it forward. We also improved inside the legal governance and target operating model. Section 4 on eligibility requirements was improved. As we agreed with the leader yesterday, further improvement is still encouraged. So it's text, but it's text that we'll no doubt revisit and hopefully sharpen and improve still further. But that was the merge that we put through. We also did a merge sort of more technical. And the more technical merge was this one here about the registrar data schema. So the idea of this merge was in the set of documents was one that described how registrars present the information that we put into this directory, this grid. And the description we gave was this table that you can see in front of you now. It's sort of basically a markdown text table in which you kind of make things bold or not bold, and you give natural language explanation. So there's no kind of rigor, if you like, to it. It's not machine readable as such. So we wanted to have a more data structure sort of rigor about it. It was like a JSON structure you can see now. So what we've got now is a separate file called registrar v1 JSON. And that's the file that's machine readable, can be read by participating registrars in the pilot. They can check their data structure against this file. We've got a script that reads the data they presented against this JSON, says whether it sort of parses or not, and then moves on. So that was sort of a bit of work that we did last night.
What is, just explain to me what again, what the record is, did you say it's the, I wasn't clear, you said it's it's the grid record for the registrar.
Yes, sir. So imagine that, so let's do Australia. Australia wants to participate in the grid. Australia, the UN member state, Australia, says our registrar for companies is ASIC. So now we have the UN member state, Australia, saying ASIC is the registrar, and the register is the Australian Business Number Register, ABN. And that's the sort of a record, if you like, that would be in here saying, okay, so the country code is AUS, the registrar name is ASIC, the register name is ABN, the type, and so on. So you have that kind of structure, and that will be repeated. So one registrar might operate many registers, pardon me, and obviously one UN member state will have many registrars, typically speaking. So it's that kind of stuff we're dealing with here.
Yeah, no, so that's pretty much the focus of, you know, what I'm talking about too.
Okay, cool. So that was one of the things. Then the longest discussion, I think the longest probably, was around an issue that's still alive and sort of.
Can I just can you just go back just for 1 second? Sorry, I just saw, just as you were leaving the page, legal transparency there. Oh wait, oh, up. You were just there. It was on the page. Scroll down a bit. Yeah. Keep going. Just a bit.
Do you mean
further up.
yeah,
right there, right there. You see, data quality principles.
Yeah. So what this is saying, there's an idea. All of these are ideas until they become formalized. But the idea is, it's all very well for a registrar to be declared by the UN member state as the authoritative body for a thing like organizations. But if you're trying to understand how rigorous and how meaningful is having an organization ID in that country, you'd want to have a chance of reading the framework, the legal framework that defines organization ID in this country. You know, is it, you know, is your checkbook big enough? We'll give you one, or is it actually quite a rigorous process and so on. So the idea was that there should be a link, pointer, or something, a reference to the legal jurisdiction, the legal framework that defines the role of the registrar in this instance, say organizations.
Right. No, I'm totally getting that right there. So
one thing to make sure we're not on a different page, because I feel we probably are on the same page, Mark. This is only the grid. It's not about what registrars issue. Okay, so what registrars issue to their organizations and how organizations communicate with each other is nothing to do with this grid.
Right.
So this is like a white list or directory or something of recognized registrars from countries.
Right. So, yeah. So this is basically, so the controller identification record is basically the base set of fields that, you know, so if you look at it from, I guess the minimum viable way to build this record forward, if you will, using a public standard infrastructure, then the controller identification record would be the first elements you would need to add for using a digital identifier, right? And these would be the things you would need to add onto that record. Well, actually, legal basis is already there. And so like this is literally like sort of an extension of that, the common required fields, which are, well, no, so you already, like, I mean, so yeah, so that's what basically what I'm going to present on anyway.
Excellent.
In a minute. But I'm just saying, so we're talking about the same, very close to the same thing.
Cool. So what we're going to do, give us give us a minute or two to finish the what yesterday stuff was. Then we're going to give the complete floor to you. And my request for you, Mark, is going to be obviously explain to us what the thing is you're explaining to us, is what it is, why it's important, and then to the best of your ability, how you think or how you're seeing it maps to what we're doing, right? And that's those are the three things that are going to obviously be of key interest to us. So this was a relatively simple. The fundamental idea of the merge we did was just to basically surface a more formal definition of the data structure required. That was all, so that we could run code against pilots that are offering registrar data. So that was what we did with that merge. And then we had a very long discussion on an issue, which was this issue. And to cut the very long story short, probably it's not finished yet, the story about this thing, but the idea is, how much information should this concept of a digital identity anchor have within it? I think we are now narrowing down on a simplest possible but no simpler kind of definition. So the simplest possible would be the identifier issued by the authoritative registrar, whatever that is, whatever the structure is, the did or dids submitted by the applicant, wrapped up in a cryptographically protected verifiable credential, and then sort of issued back or recorded by the registrar. And there's a whole bunch of other discussions that you'll see in this thread further down around people, and you were a part of that discussion, I think, Mark, at a point. That's how you came in on this sort of talk. We're going to have where you are in here somewhere. You're up the top somewhere. But the discussion was going into areas like what happens if somebody alters the content of the did doc that the dids point to. Can a did doc have more than one identifier, and all sorts of stuff? And I kind of want to gradually simplify as best we can. So I'm thinking we're going to head towards a simple, I'm calling it atomic DIA, rather than a multi-dimensional DIA, but we'll see how that pans out. That was the kind of main discussion. So I'm very happy to hand the floor over to you, Mark. Do you want to share screens and do stuff like that?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. You should be able to do that, I think. I'll stop sharing.
Give me a second.
You should be able to see on the screen a kind of monitor with an up arrow.
Yeah. No, sorry. I'm slightly jumping around looking for a piece of information. Being allowed to share window, allowed to share screen. For some reason, there's a button on this.
Sounds like you're using a Mac, which is a good thing.
Yeah. I am just going to share. I'm sorry about this technical. I'm just going to share this window. Can you see my window here?
Not yet, but it could. There could be a slight. Okay, it's coming. It's coming. Yes, now. It's not high res yet, but I think it's just resolving on my screen actually.
Okay, well, so I just like I get so many things
That's
I'd like to say, but there's not a lot, definitely not a lot of time. Just that, you know, this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm really happy. You know, so you know, reviewing DIA, there's a lot of really positive things about it. You know, and I definitely think I'm 100% there on the public transparency infrastructure, which I think there's a huge consensus on, you know, and probably why people are here. And there's, you know, there's a lot of benefits to that. So, that being said, you know, it's great to actually be able to have this conversation. And by reviewing it and trying to present this to you, I've actually learned a lot as well, you know, and a lot of it's about how to maybe explain some of this stuff. So, yeah, so we have a word for this called transparency, which is like governance grade transparency evidence. So we're talking about the use or the digital public or digital transparency infrastructure that's public, as opposed to privatized transparency infrastructure or notice or notifications or records that are not public. And the contents of the transparency are the records and the semantics is really kind of really where this goes down to. So that's really where we're getting to. But so I think the fundamental issue is that digital identity frameworks overlook, you know, trust as a huge human judgment component, and the human part of trust, that you know, and a lot I think is about what's relative to that trust is relative to a human or to the stakeholder, and it's, you know, I think in digital identity management or digital identification management, we're really talking about reliability and consistency and these sort of terms, which give people confidence, which is a different thing than trust, right? So that there's a lot of, you know, having to pull that apart a bit to explain this. So that's the other part. So
those are all very, and you've got an audience, I'm sure that's likes all of the words you've been using so far, Mark, but your screen isn't being shared anymore. I don't know if you still want to share it.
did it appear?
Yeah. It appeared. You were looking at a PDF. We were looking at a PDF document, and you'd moved down from page 1 to sort of page 2. You had 14 pages in or something. Yeah, and then it's just, is that true for you guys as well, Sankshan? Is that you can't see that? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, guys. Well, it's Meet needs permission to share screen. What?
It worked before though, right? So
yeah, let me try again. Share this window. There we go.
yeah, that's it again. Cool.
All right, so I'll kind of speed up now. So I think
You've
we're
got another
talking about
20 minutes at least, Mark. You've got at least 20, 25 minutes. It's it don't disservice yourself. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're talking about governance grade transparency, you know, for evidence. We're talking about expectable proof that makes digital systems trust capable for humans. So I think right now we're not like we're talking about trust, but we're not actually talking about systems that are trust capable for humans. They might be trust capable in other ways, but and you know, so that's why I think there's a lot of ambiguity around the word trust. So, you know, transparency, you know, I think, yeah, so we've already done this slide. Let me just run on.
It's
the problem really
disappeared again. I think if you move away from the window you're sharing, the Mac says you don't want to share that anymore. I'm going to dissolve it. So if you flip to another window away from the one that you're sharing, I think it then goes, okay, I'm removing the share.
All right. Well, I got a fix for that. Hold on a second.
I mean, is this a public document? Marcus,
Uh,
you can
oh,
also share
yeah, I can share the document.
share the URL or something. We can open it if you like. Whatever's easiest for you, mate.
Yeah, over again. Well, you guys all sound very happy and good. You got like a lot of stuff going on this stuff. All right, there we go. How's
Cool.
that?
It's there. Don't leave that window.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, what is transparency? Trust versus trustworthiness, which is like a system claim, and then transparency, which is sort of the evidence bridge of that system claim. So, there's a evidential record is really what this gets to. And the problem is that, policy is invisible in context when you're using digital identity. And data protection, non-modernized data protection regulation doesn't account at all for this context because it was made well before the internet, and there's no concept. Basically, consent comes from the 1967 Helsinki Declaration, which is a medical conference where they made the rules to stop experimental medical science. And that's really the context of consent that is sort of implemented in data protection regulation. I'm not sure if people know that, but so the problem with digital identification is you're adding to that physical concept of data protection, invisible policy at the moment of use. And that has hidden authorities and sort of placeholder language that might be third-party language that's inserted into a physical, relationship between people, and that creates, systemic risk. So we all know that about the systemic risk because if you've clicked on "I agree" to stuff you've never read online, that's every time you've done that, you've been adding to that risk. So that's pretty much the problem symptom. So when I talk about the controller identity record or the first transparency artifact, we're really talking about the Anchor PII controller identification record, which is a machine readable, human expectable artifact that makes the accountable controller and its authority context visible before identification or data collection begins. So that's the very close to the record that you just showed, you guys just talked about. So I spent the way I came to find this is actually by running and working on something called a digital identity. Well, it was called Identity Trust Community Interest Company. It was the first identity trust community interest company in the UK in 2007. So we were that was the kind of research we were working on. I was working on this problem and I had no clue at all what this stuff was. It was the first, I did, completely blind really. And I started learning about this. So I ended up looking at all the international privacy instruments or the data governance instruments. There was this research study from the International Security, Privacy, and Trust Risk Analysis Group, and it showed that notice was the only consistent element in every single instrument, and consistent in that it's pretty much the same that you required to provide notice prior to, and provide means publicly provide. And there's a lot of laws that say you have to provide notice publicly, and especially the identity of who is in control of your information. So this is consistent. This requirement is consistent across jurisdictions everywhere. So after doing all of this research and stuff over the years, we ended up getting to the consent receipt, but it effectively looks at the field name element, which is the controller legal name, the accountable entity, and the reason why it's there, is because it's the identifier of who is responsible and accountable. So this is the legal identifier, not the digital identifier. And you have to separate the two from here. And then you can add to this record more elements. Like, so if you have going to do a digital identifier, there's a whole bunch of elements that you can add. So long story short, here's a little map of the legal requirement for controller name across these instruments. And one of them, Convention 108 Plus, is actually an international instrument that is the most authoritative. In fact, it is the only instrument internationally that does or provides any governance for this. I know that I saw the one guardrail in the DI document was what was the name? I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but for insolvency, there's an insolvency international mechanism that's mentioned in DIA for this. And insolvency doesn't cover any of these things that you need for digital identity. What does cover it is Convention 108 Plus. So I highly recommend that. And looking at these, and I think there's the ultimate data protection violation for digital identity management is that you have something called a relying party. And ultimately, a relying party is a role element of the controller role. So if you're a controller, which is the generic accountable person in charge, an entity in charge, then you are a relying party naturally as a controller. It's a part of your, job as a company or a company owner or as a service. And then you can even do that as services. You mail or whatever. There's a common traditional relying party role in society that has relying party common rules. But if you split that role out and you turn into Google, and now everybody's using Google for logging in, and that's invisible, then there's no transparency over that particular thing. And data protection law, which was made before the internet, has no concept of this. There's no protection in data protection law. And Convention 108 was the original international thing that started in 1980, was first signed in 1981 by one country, basically becomes modernized in 2018, which 2018. So this is like 2 years after GDPR, or when the GDPR came into force. This was modernized, and at the same time in Europe they had the EU 1725 regulation, which is actually the international GDPR, and in it has the legal regulation for operationalized personal data. So everybody's using the GDPR for digital identity management, and it's actually not relevant to digital identity management. So that's a fundamental problem right now in the world, right? Because nobody knows this, right? You're actually using law that doesn't have the legal scope of authority or capacity to govern digital identity management or this, right? So this is pretty much where I'm going with that. So that's what restraint plus valid relying party really comes from. And in order to stop this surveillance capitalism and these problems with digital identification, you have to address this core root problem, especially at the infrastructure level at which DIA and this project's working at. So
pause for a second, Mark. Again,
I have to present to you guys. I'm like, that's why I was like, yes, I have to present.
Okay, that's cool. But unfortunately, your screen has disappeared again. Now, I don't know whether that's material, and we're listening obviously to what you're saying. But do you need us to see the slides or the pages as you're going through, because they've disappeared again? Do you want us? Do you have a link for that document? Is there a document?
Well, that's what I could do. I could do that. I can give a link.
And then you could tell us, if you go to page 2 or 3 or 4, if you tell us what we should be looking at, we can make sure we're looking at that page as you're explaining the content.
Yeah.
Or
that's just
if
terrible.
you send us the link, I can share my screen and you can then talk to it, and you'll know that we're all looking at that same page. I don't mind.
Well, I think the reason why is because I was using 2 browser windows.
Yeah. I think when you flip from one context to another, it was protecting you.
Yeah. So
unhelpful.
I've just moved it over to the same allow to share window. Sorry. Share this window. All right. Yeah. So basically, Apple's like saying, no, you can't drag me between these two contexts. You know, it's making a one browser window to the other split. So, yeah. Anyways, can you see my screen now?
Yes. And Apple always has your best interests at heart, mate. I trust that. Well, okay.
Oh yeah, that's what they do. That's why they're so rich.
That's what their brand is. That's what their brand is. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know. Is it too? I'll turn that. Okay. So yeah. So really, you know, this gets down to this core like challenge or thing I'm trying to get to is the preventing ungoverned identifier authority, right? I call it the transparency factor, right? The extra that they take without your permission, the things they're doing that aren't allowed, that they're doing anyways, that's ungoverned, you know, which is what we're talking about here, really, right? So, and ultimately in data protection law, you know, this is called secondary use, right? So using your data for a secondary purpose. Anyways, it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't take into account digital identifiers is the short version for that. Now I can't get it. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So understanding, I think, a little bit more about digital identifiers and digital identification, like, you know, deconflating those a bit will help. So I've done a lot of work and it's taken a while, but it's very interesting to me at least. So I think it might actually be interesting to you guys too. But that, can you see my screen still?
Yes, yeah, there's a hand holding the, I can't remember the name of the object, but it's a very well known earliest human writing object thing.
Yeah, so it's the earliest form of human writing ever found. It's a receipt. And it's basically what it does is it's got these little identifiers on it that link to a physical world object. And it's a baked piece of clay. So it's a token. And it was, you know, it's got all of these things we love about it. About identifiers. So it, you know, it is an identifier. It's on a record. And here's a bit about the evolution about that, but it's a governance anchor. So this is a trust anchor, right? That we're referring to, and you know, this is sort of the evolution of that trust anchor to what we're talking about now. And these are the features and attributes of that, really. But really, yeah. So it really advanced, I think, is what so it's actually so similar. It's almost exactly similar. They advanced to something called commercial paper, like in the 1820s, and then they wanted to use it internationally, right? So the governance like troubles they've had, you know, trying to use currency and using it internationally is, you know, ended up in putting identifiers or numbers onto bills, right? So you could actually, you had the security. So you now you had the record, which was the currency, the piece of paper, and an identifier put onto that record, and then a security feature put into the paper, right? So you're looking at the things that needed to go into make a record, which is now being called a verified credential in this new context, right? So, but if you're disintermediating an identifier from a record, right, is what we're technically doing. So the governance record or the controller identity record is the actual record of identity, right? That's the identity record, right? So we're going through relying parties, or we're relying this, anyways. So I'm just breaking it down and saying it's much different. I could use the word identification versus identity, because where you making an identification or a surveillance scheme for an identifier on an official identity record, right? So I think that's really it's really important to clarify those elements, and that those create risks, and those risks are externalized, right? The governance risks are externalized. What's covered and what's called trust here is really technical trust, which is called, security to humans, right? It's only technical trust to people who work in digital identity management, right? So it doesn't scale out of digital identity management, that term. It definitely doesn't work for a global trust registry. That's misinformative, because that's not actually what it actually is. And you want people to trust it. So if you want people to actually use the word trust or feel that word trust while using this, you can't miscall it trust. Is the kind of pet peeve I have here, which is it's because it makes it difficult to actually then do or use a registry to actually create something that's trust capable or trustworthy for people. So that's
I'm going to pause you again. I'm going to pause you again briefly, Mark. Firstly, to say, you're so right. I was deeply troubled by inheriting a project called the Global Trust Registry, because it's all sorts of ambition and wrongness about that title. But we've kind of moved away a little bit from that particular title, and we have a thing called GRID and a thing called DIAs. But your screen, I'm sorry to say, is no longer being shared with us. Do you want to share the link file, or is there a way to?
Yeah. I'm literally publishing this right now. I think I can just publish it to a link and share it. Yeah. Oh, anyways, I just keep going on. I'm gonna stop. I know I go too deep into this. I know you guys can actually understand the details. So I'm going a bit too long. So
I wonder. Yeah, let's start talking about what application.
Let me just speed. Yeah, let me get to the good stuff here.
Get to good
and
stuff.
Then I'll
go.
So first of all, you guys should be able to use this link. I'm scared to send out links because actually there's a lot of errors in this presentation. So you're not allowed to share.
Okay.
Not allowed to share. I just generated it for us for that. Okay, so if you get that link, all right. So there's
I think the link will require us to sign in with something. I don't know if that's
Shut up. Okay, hold on for a second. Let me get another link.
I respect, by the way, your desire not to share publicly something that's not ready yet. That's fine. Don't do what you don't want to do.
All right, cool. Well, I'm not going to make it discoverable on the web, but anyone with this link should be able to view it. How's that?
Yeah. If that's
all right.
That's cool.
Yeah, give me this link right here. Oh, sorry about that. Anyway, so I don't want to get pedantically over.
That works.
So forget the history. The key issue. So we just talked about the little history of where the identifier comes from, and that it's governed by the record. That's basically all it's trying to say. So hence, the point really is for humans to trust it. The receipt came first, the record came second. Scripting came before learning how to write, and the want for money and trade is what developed all of this stuff. And the more we did that and expanded and decentralized, the more we needed to come up with governance. But you get to the point where you get the cookies, which are basically receipts hijacked and turned privatized and auctioned off. So instead of you getting the receipt, like in a banking transaction, it's being auctioned for advertising. And then, but the data protection law still says you have 30 days and you go out of band. But meanwhile, the technology is not analog technology. The technology has the capacity to give you real-time transparency and control over the data, but instead it's being used to give real-time advertising, right? So it's basically, the governance problem. And how's that happening? Well, it's because the relying party has been separated from the controller, and it could be in any jurisdiction. And the transparency requirements are only for physical transparency. You need reciprocal Well, this is where really where I love Dia is you guys actually brought in the term. I don't know who wrote it. I'd like to know, but reciprocal transparency. Oh no, sorry, reciprocity and proportionality. So Convention 108 plus also the modernization tool is reciprocity and proportionality. That's the modernization principle. So you need to apply reciprocity proportionality to digital identity for transparency in order for you to have the governance guardrail that matches the technology guardrail of the DID. So so that's basically the fundamental overall. So just to give if you go down to international digital identifier transparency notice requirements by context, as soon as you add a digital identifier in all of these laws, all of a sudden you have to give notices and notifications for the use of digital identifiers. So that record, that controller record, all of a sudden has to expand to include the purpose and the digital, to include all of these contexts. If you didn't, go use digital identifiers across domains, outside of your local house or outside of your community, you need just a small notice. If you go regionally, you need another one. If you go nationally, that's a notice. Look, we're doing something in the coffee shop, but really this is going to people nationally or going to devices nationally. But then if you go internationally, you have, if you're not expecting that, if that's not the purpose of the use of the digital identifier, then there's a missing piece of transparency. And these are the notice requirements for that transparency that's already in law. So they already exist. And they're physical space ones and the digital space ones. So if you go down to the missing governance evidence layer, this is basically the thing that I'm trying to get to. And this is ultimately what the 27560 profile is for the transparency code of conduct that I'm working on, and we put forward to ISO, and there's a plenary next in 2 weeks on this profile, which is really a Convention 108 plus code of conduct for digital transparency to govern identity management internationally. Because there's basically this framework and standard for doing this, but you need to have a grid, right? So this is assuming there's a grid that so that's part of the standard. It's like this is the international requirements for the law, but we don't have this infrastructure to make it with. And what CEFACT has done is it's the right all of the things that's done here is great, is correct. International, the principles, the type of organization, the neutrality, the technology agnostic is really important. For the governance rules, you also have to have legal basis agnostic, which is missing there, right? So, and you also have that the social governance, it has to be social governance agnostic. So there's like two more guardrails, like I think that are provided by Convention 108 plus and 29100, which is the 27001 security privacy framework, which basically the language PII controller and PII principle comes from this 27001 and 29100 standard. But 27001 is not open and free to access, so it's not suitable for public infrastructure or transparency, right? So we couldn't. So I would say you couldn't even use it. You can't use it for this, right? Just like you can't use data protection, you can't use 27001. The only thing that's eligible is 29100 security and privacy framework, because it's open and free to access, and it's meant for this purpose. It's fit for purpose. So I really like DIA also because it says that you need competent authorities, right? It needs to be authoritative and competent, right? And competent means fit for purpose, I believe. So my interpretation of what competent means in this context is fit for purpose. So that means you need to have fit for purpose international instruments for governance to be used with these things. And I believe that these two things go together like peanut butter and chocolate.
That's a mix I haven't tried, but by the way, I do peanut butter and banana. We're nearly at the top of an hour, but that's
Yeah.
great. I'm pretty sure others have got questions too. I don't know. Do you, Sankashan, I can see you. Like, obviously, see you. You're sharing your view. Is there anything you want to sort of ask Mark first, or indeed Joe, if you're also able to talk?
No, I'm good. I think I need to take a look at the spec work that Mark has walked us through to be able to figure out how it links to the DIA work and the bits that we have.
So I think basically there's the legal artifact and the making of the legal record, which is just like the thing just above the DIA, all right? Or so I say DIA is the end of that. So if you, it's the same record, right? But I think if you were to build the record naturally, organically, you know, from the ground up, if you will, you would get to the point where you need the registrar's controller information, right? So so this is, and then you get to your DIA record. So I think what you're saying is just there's one legal, like it's called a legal record of identification that is that is all the registrars would have the, you know, you would map the registrar's information to this controller identification record, but also everybody is a controller identification record. So all the services, everybody who's a service, you know, they're all mapped to the same controller identification record schema, which is the map to all the laws here. And it's exactly what you guys have already figured out your piece on, which you add that on to say, well, this is the controller registrar. And if you're gonna, you know, depending on what the services are and what technologies are used, you need to add more, more transparency to that record, basically. And that record can sit, so we are proposing that there's a well-known location at IANA for well-known transparency / notice. So notice.txt file. And you just basically put that record that you guys have into the notice.txt file. And that controller has to have that record in there. But besides that, now you need 4 levels of assurance. So you have 4 levels of technical assurance for digital trust. Well, you need the 4 levels of transparency assurance, which are pretty much like a parallel, but in the reverse direction. So the person can see who the registrar is, right? So so it's still a surveillance, but so if you have both of those, then you have this solution here. So it's just basically, that's it. I'll stop there. I'll stop talking because I can just keep going.
It is very, very interesting, but you're right. We're kind of near the end now, and as Sankashan said, you've given us a lot that we need to digest. That where I'm sitting at the moment with this is I've always admired the work you've been doing and the content you've been producing. So it's great to hear you kind of walk through the latest stuff. For my first thinking, and this is something I do need to sort of work through, is that our primary focus with this work with the grid and CEFACT is companies, organizations, structures like that, not people. And so trade for them is about a company A sending something to company B. Now, companies have rights and they have duties and they have protections. And ultimately, companies end up being owned by people, or there are beneficiaries and so on. So there are people down the stream. But the typical exchanges that are involved are to do with corporate law and regulations, and not to do with personal law in terms of what a company needs to send. But the idea,
this isn't personal law,
So
it's public law. It's corporate law.
Well, the corporate law doesn't have a PII, right? So
it's only Australia. Australia is the only one that really separates, like, turns them to these two things apart, like the security and privacy. But in reality, they're the same thing. It's secure. It's actually safety, security. It's safety, actually, to be honest. That the safety requirements that are first before the corporate ones.
So what I want to say is, Mark, what I want to say is we need to digest what you're saying and think about how if and how it maps in. But I do think that the observation you're making around this pattern, let's call it a pattern, of a UN body with recognized registrars, and it creates a sort of whitelist like a KOPKD and whatever else, is a pattern that could offer this international translation and recognition of mutuality, reciprocity, and so on at a personal identifier level. I kind of think that's exciting, but it may not be
Yeah.
the grid that we're building for CEFACT. It could be a
So
grid.
I don't. I don't understand where are you getting the personal identifier stuff from. Like, how are you hearing that? I didn't say anything at all about a personal. Like one thing
because
about personal identifier.
because you have PII in your slides.
Oh, so a PII controller, right? So that's just that's the international. Now I understand what you mean. Okay, so that's why I was reactive. Like, what are you talking about? No, so so the PII controller is like company name. That's what that stands for, right? So they're the ones that control personal. Yeah, it's just the way they use it.
Information is not the company name.
No, it's a PII controller is what it's called in, like, so the name of the.
We're not
right.
So
I
we're
know,
not
but you're saying.
about,
I know you're not talking about controlling PII. I know that, right? And the term is not that. It's in the Convention 108 plus. It's just called controller. That's all. It's just the controller, and yeah, we go into a debate about whether or not any of the trade people, like, or any of these companies that have legal entities, they all have to be operated by a person who has personal information, and this is the personal information of the controller, who is the person who's controlling the legal entity. So that's basically what that means. It's the personal information of the person controlling the entity.
Yeah. So that I kind of get what you're saying, but I don't know that that's actually extensible for what we're doing. I am very keen not to include anything to do with people inside the work we're doing for Grid, because I do recognize and respect there's a whole body of work that needs to be done to make that appropriate. What we want to do is make trade easier between countries and companies.
Yes.
And that sort of, it requires international trade law. So UN CITRAL, MLETR become more relevant than GDPR.
Right. Well, GDPR is not relevant at all because it's not an international law. So that's a myth right there. And the data protection is also a thing. And I'm not talking. I am only talking about controllers. So I'm not talking about.
It's not only not relevant because it's only a European law. It's not relevant because it's the wrong kind of law. Right. It's not a law that's relevant to the work we're doing.
Right. If you use a digital identifier, if you're using a digital identifier, right?
Yes.
That references a person, then
no, we're not.
Convention 108.
We're not using a digital identifier that recognizes a person.
No, not recognizes. You're referencing the name of the person who is the registrar. At the registrar, you don't have.
No, we don't.
There's no contact. There's no contact.
ASIC. No, we recognize ASIC. We don't recognize the person who's responsible for ASIC. It's up to the government of Australia to decide who the person responsible is for ASIC. We won't record that in the grid. Not in any public sense. There'll be no recognition of the individual that's responsible for the registration of companies in Australia.
So I think the actual thing. This is very good. This is very good. Like so the fact is is that the person who operates a company, right? The person accountable, right? So all the law says is that, so it doesn't matter if you're the employee of that company or if you're the owner or you're a director of a government department, it's still the government department's the legal entity. So any legal entity at all, right? Someone has to operate it or use it, or in their name, is a person who's accountable legally, right, for that, right? So in all of these records, it doesn't matter. You can't get away from the fact, and if you do, you're violating this DIA document, right? Because the DIA document requires transparency and accountability, and it says it multiple times. So you can't just say we're not going to. You have to use personal information, and we're talking about physical governance, not digital governance. So physical governance means it's the person who's actually like an employee who still needs a notice that they're going to implement digital identification, and it's going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to click agree. I take responsibility for installing DIA at this registry. You know, there's still that person, right? That has to operate.
There's still a disconnect here, Mark. Still a disconnect. You are right. I'm not saying you're wrong. You are right that ultimately, under most legal jurisdictions that I'm aware of around the world, things like companies end up having a relationship to people, to legal, natural people. So that's a truism. I'm not disputing that. What we are, though, focused on is the artifacts of trade, the documents that are sent in trade, the claims that are made by a company, which I accept has at its end some shareholders, some bodies, some boards, and whatever else is. But this company is the only thing on that document, on that invoice, is the company name.
Right.
And they're sending some materials to a company in another country, and they need to meet the regulatory requirements. And what we want to solve is the problem that says that company is duly registered by an authoritative registrar. The other stuff, all the really important other stuff around who individually is the person, that's a whole other level.
Okay. So the disconnect, like a little bit disconnect is, so, but you want to verify, you want to make it, just repeat that last sentence.
So all we want to verify is that the bill of materials that's arrived on the desk in Singapore, that the person looking
who's we? Say, who does the verify? Are you?
It's a company. So as far as the law,
there has to be a person. Are you talking automatically? Nobody's involved at all. They're verifying themselves. You're making an assertion that there's no people involved.
No, I'm not.
But that's not true.
I'm saying the law that we're interested in is the law that allows or prevents companies from doing the wrong thing or the right thing in trade. So as far as the initial process is concerned, the border control wants to make sure that the border control. Please listen, Mark. The border control is not going to investigate the individual person that sent the individual living in their house somewhere in a country that's sending the materials. They're going to investigate the company that is sending the materials first. The responsibility lies with the company. If that company is found to have failed, they will no doubt be explored as to who the individual was. But in border control trade, it's not about people, it's about companies.
Yeah, no, but I think it should be the same way. Okay, I think there's a reason why I'm saying this sort of stuff, and the one pattern I think that's most exciting to me is the one that's sort of missing here is when the registrar is also the authoritative source and also the relying party. So it imitates a controller in physical space digitally, as a registrar would in physical space. It has the same rules digitally. Is what I'm trying to say. And if you have that, then what happens is that people can then use verified claims and these sort of things without exposing themselves. They can be anonymous because you do not need people's data at all, is what I'm trying to say. But so we're kind of arguing over a moot point. But the point I'm trying to say is even in a context where you still need to have the name of the person who's responsible for the company, even in trade, you still, that doesn't need to be first, A. And B, it should be, that's not the point. That's only the point in when there's edge cases and you need to know who that is, right? So that's the other point I totally agree with you on, and that I'm trying to get to. So, but the point of I'm getting to beneath that is the actual law and the governing law for international use of digital identification technology, surveillance technology, right? So I'm actually talking about the use of the digital identification technology itself is what triggers these governance requirements. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying identifying people or not. I'm saying something else. I'm saying it's not about people. It's about the use of the technology you're using and where you're using it that triggers these legal requirements. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, generally, Mark, it's been fascinating, and thank you for the share.
It's so great to talk like this, and
if you're able
to have these conversations.
Sure. If you're able to, when that document is ready, I mean, I respect your notice to us that this document is not ready for public use yet.
Yeah.
but I'd love in the minutes to be able to share something that others can see what you are sharing with us, if that's possible. So when you think it's okay enough to be read only or whatever you want, then please share a link that we can share to others.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that I had like a short presentation, and I really wanted to get to the things you actually said. I actually written out, here's the challenges that I found in DIA. Here's the recommendations, and here's this approach, and here's the benefits of this approach. Like I really wanted to get there. I'm like, here's what I'm saying, and here's and all I got to do was
well, let's why don't you raise an issue? I mean, we've already got a fairly long issue in the project around the DIA spec, but you might want to give yourself clear space and raise a separate issue, right? So that there's no kind of.
Well, here's what I was actually supposed to say. Here's what I was supposed to cover. The anchor work group at Cantera would really like to have a liaison and contribute the controller identification record work and this work to a place like in this to here, because this is the appropriate place for this work to actually be contributed. And so I think that's a great alignment. I'm not sure and then so that's basically the thing, because there is that. But the fundamental thing is just digital identification brings in personal data itself. I think it's not that we want to concentrate on that or you need it. But besides that edge case and that one caveat, if you don't ignore that, you don't need personal. If you do that one thing properly at the root, you can actually do it so you don't need personal data and the rest of it. If you know what I mean. Like so so there is that way of looking at it. Anyway, I'll stop there.
So I encourage you, Mark, to carry on in a sense, but not now in the call, but carry on and putting perhaps create a fresh issue inside our repo that gives you the clear space to sort of put the points forward and the materials that you want us to be aware of. And that will mean that we can focus on it without being distracted by other parts of the conversation.
I'm just struggling getting to the right meetings or times and stuff. And I basically, I've stumbled in rudely to Sankashan's thread there and didn't tell you guys what I was talking about and didn't offer any recommendations. So I but if I could find the right place to send my comments on this document, DIA, without exposing them to everybody so that they don't cause, trouble, then that would be good. Or maybe I can. I'll just give you a nice version. But there's really good things about it, but there's also some pretty bad things about it. So
cool. Well, that's what the public issue stuff is for. Don't worry about saying things that are challenging. It's okay. But we've got to go. It's 10 past the hour. We meant to finish sort of 20 minutes ago. So but thank you very much
for the patience.
No problem at all. You're always welcome. And
enjoyed it a lot, boys. It was good.
Thanks,
I think we got there in the end. It was good. Thanks. Well done.
Thanks, Sankashan. Thanks, Joe. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Well done.
Oh, come on.